London, 1845. The whispers began in Lady Hamilton's drawing-room on a Tuesday afternoon, spreading through Mayfair like wildfire by Wednesday morning, and reaching fever pitch by Thursday's soirée at Almack's. By Friday, it was the only topic worthy of discussion in every fashionable salon from Grosvenor Square to Belgravia. "Have you heard? The Duke of Jamesford was seen twice in a fortnight at the Rothwell residence. The widowed Countess has a governess, does she not? A plain little thing from Hampshire, I believe. My dear, it cannot possibly be true. The most eligible bachelor in London, captivated by a governess? Preposterous!" But Eleanor Reed, the governess in question, remained blissfully unaware of society's fascination with her. At that very moment, she sat in the schoolroom of Rothwell House, correcting young Lady Sophia's French exercises with the same steady concentration that had defined her 26 years of existence. "Miss Reed, must I learn all these irregular verbs?" "I shall never need French when I'm married," Sophia whined, twirling a golden curl around her finger. "Lady Sophia, an educated woman is always at an advantage, married or not," Eleanor replied, not looking up from her work. "Besides, your mother wishes you to be accomplished, and I intend to see her wishes fulfilled." The scratching of her pen against parchment filled the room, interrupted only by Sophia's occasional sighs. Eleanor's life had been reduced to this quiet routine since her father's death 3 years prior, a respectable position in a noble household, teaching subjects she herself had mastered under her father's guidance. The Reverend Reed had educated his daughter as though she were a son, filling her mind with classics, mathematics, and languages, never preparing her for the harsh reality that would follow his passing, a life of servitude in the homes of her social superiors. A sharp knock at the schoolroom door startled both teacher and pupil. "Enter," Eleanor called, straightening her simple grey dress and tucking a wayward strand of chestnut hair back into her severe bun. The Countess of Rothwell's lady's maid appeared, curtsying slightly. "Miss Reed, her ladyship requests your presence in the drawing-room immediately." Eleanor's heart quickened. In her experience, unexpected summonses rarely brought good news. "Lady Sophia, please continue with exercises 6 through 10. I shall return shortly." As she followed the maid down the grand staircase, Eleanor mentally reviewed her recent conduct, finding nothing worthy of reprimand. She had been, as always, the model of propriety and diligence. The drawing-room doors opened to reveal not only the Countess of Rothwell but also a tall figure standing by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon light. At the sound of her entrance, he turned, and Eleanor found herself looking into the most penetrating blue eyes she had ever encountered. "Ah, Miss Reed," the Countess said, her voice carrying a strange note of excitement, "allow me to present His Grace, Zachariah Jamesford, the Duke of Jamesford." The Duke stepped forward, and Eleanor dropped into a perfect curtsy, years of training overriding her shock. "Your Grace," she murmured, eyes appropriately lowered. "Miss Reed," he replied, his deep voice sending an inexplicable shiver down her spine. "I've heard much about your exceptional teaching methods." Eleanor rose, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Your Grace is too kind. I merely fulfill my duties as best I can." The Duke's mouth curved slightly. "Indeed. Lady Rothwell tells me you're fluent in 4 languages and possess knowledge of mathematics that would put many university men to shame." Confused by this unexpected interview, Eleanor glanced at the Countess, who smiled encouragingly. "His Grace has a proposition for you, Miss Reed. One I believe you should consider most carefully. My niece," the Duke explained, "has proven too much for her previous 3 governesses. At 12 years old, she possesses both exceptional intelligence and a will of iron. What she requires is not another simpering miss who will bend to her whims, but someone who can challenge her." Eleanor remained silent, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I would like to offer you the position of governess at Jamesford House," he said directly. "The salary would be double what you currently earn." The offer was so unexpected that Eleanor momentarily forgot her place. "But your Grace doesn't even know my qualifications beyond Lady Rothwell's recommendation." Something flickered in those blue eyes, amusement, perhaps. "On the contrary, Miss Reed. I've made extensive inquiries." the daughter of Reverend Jonathan Reed, educated in classics, mathematics, and modern languages. Your references from the Bennets in Hampshire were exemplary. You've transformed Lady Sophia from a willful child into a young lady of accomplishment in less than 2 years. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, disconcerted that this powerful man had investigated her background so thoroughly. You would have your own suite of rooms at Jamesford House, he continued, and complete authority over my niece's education. I ask only that you report to me weekly on her progress. Your Grace is most generous, Eleanor replied carefully. However, I have responsibilities to Lady Rothwell and Lady Sophia. The Countess waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense, Miss Reed. This is a wonderful opportunity for you. I can easily secure another governess. Eleanor sensed something unspoken passing between her employer and the Duke, but could not decipher it. Why would a Duke personally involve himself in hiring a governess? Surely such matters were delegated to a housekeeper or steward. May I have some time to consider your Grace's offer? Eleanor asked, maintaining her composure despite her inner turmoil. Of course, the Duke replied, though his expression suggested he was unaccustomed to having his offers met with hesitation. I shall expect your answer tomorrow. Good day, Miss Reed. As he bowed and took his leave, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to fill the room, making it feel suddenly empty when he departed. Well, Miss Reed, the Countess said, her tone arch, it seems you've made quite an impression on His Grace. I cannot imagine how, my lady. I've never met the Duke before today. The Countess's smile was enigmatic. His Grace attended Lady Sophia's musical performance at my spring gathering. He was most impressed by your instruction. Eleanor had no memory of the Duke at that event, but then, she rarely paid attention to the aristocratic guests, focusing instead on ensuring her pupil performed creditably. The Duke of Jamesford rarely takes an interest in anything outside his business ventures and parliamentary duties, the Countess continued. His personal attention to this matter is unusual. All the more reason for caution, my lady, Eleanor replied. I should not wish to accept a position based on a misunderstanding of my abilities. Dear girl, the Countess said, her voice softening, you underestimate yourself. But consider carefully, opportunities such as this do not come twice in a lifetime for women in your position. That evening, Eleanor paced her small room, weighing her options. The salary the Duke offered would allow her to save substantially, perhaps even secure a modest independence in time. Yet something about the situation troubled her. Why would England's most eligible Duke, a man whose name frequently appeared in society papers linked to various aristocratic beauties, take such an interest in the appointment of a mere governess? Her decision came at dawn after a sleepless night. She would accept the position but remain vigilant. Whatever game the Duke might be playing, Eleanor Reed would not be an unwitting pawn. The following afternoon found her in the Rothwell drawing room once more, facing the Duke with her answer prepared. I accept your Grace's generous offer, she stated simply. Something like satisfaction crossed his handsome features. Excellent. My carriage will collect you and your belongings on Monday morning. So soon? Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. My niece's education has been neglected long enough, he replied. I trust you'll be ready. Of course, Your Grace. As he took his leave, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a path that would irrevocably change her life's course. Monday arrived with unseasonable fog, shrouding London in mysterious grey. Eleanor bid farewell to Lady Sophia, who shed genuine tears at losing her governess, and to the Countess, who embraced her with unusual warmth. Remember, my dear, the older woman whispered, a woman's greatest power lies in being underestimated. Before Eleanor could question this cryptic advice, the Countess pressed a small package into her hands. A token of my appreciation for your service. Do not open it until you are settled at Jamesford House. The Duke's carriage was magnificent, black lacquered wood with the Jamesford crest emblazoned on the door, pulled by 4 perfectly matched bay horses. The footman who assisted her was respectful, treating her more like a distinguished guest than a new employee. As the carriage rolled through London's foggy streets, Eleanor clutched her reticule, containing her most precious possessions, her father's pocket watch, her mother's cameo brooch, and a miniature volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. Everything else she owned fit into a single trunk strapped to the carriage's back. Jamesford House emerged from the fog like a vision from a dream, a palatial residence on Berkeley Square that made Rothwell House seem modest by comparison. Pristine white stone, imposing columns, and countless windows reflecting the meager sunlight that pierced the fog. A stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Winters greeted Eleanor at the entrance, leading her through a labyrinth of corridors and up a grand staircase. "His Grace has assigned you the blue suite in the East Wing," the woman explained, her tone suggesting she found this arrangement unusual. "It's traditionally reserved for family members." The suite consisted of a sitting room, bedchamber, and private bath, luxurious accommodations far exceeding Eleanor's expectations. The walls were covered in pale blue silk, the furniture elegant but comfortable. "You'll meet Lady Victoria at tea time," Mrs. Winters continued. "She's been informed of your arrival but is currently at her dancing lesson." Left alone to unpack, Eleanor finally opened the Countess's gift, an exquisite silver locket containing a scrap of paper with 5 words written in an elegant hand, "Trust only what you see." Before she could ponder this message, a knock at the door announced a maid bearing an invitation. The Duke requested her presence in his study immediately. The study was a magnificent room lined with leather-bound books from floor to ceiling. The Duke stood by a massive desk, examining papers with intense concentration. He looked up as she entered, and Eleanor was struck anew by his commanding presence. "Miss Reed," he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk, "please sit. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Your Grace." "I'm most grateful." He waved away her gratitude. "Before you meet Victoria, there are certain matters I must make clear." Eleanor sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, the very image of attentive propriety. "My niece has been in my guardianship for 2 years, since my brother's death," the Duke explained. "She possesses a brilliant mind but has been indulged to the point of becoming unmanageable. Her previous governesses attempted to tame her through punishment and restriction, which only increased her rebellion." "What approach would Your Grace prefer I take?" Eleanor asked. The Duke's penetrating gaze seemed to assess her worth. "I want you to challenge her, to channel her energy and intelligence productively rather than destructively. She respects intellect above all else." "I understand, Your Grace." "There's more," he continued. "Victoria will inherit a substantial fortune upon her majority. This makes her a target for fortune hunters and schemers. You must be vigilant about who approaches her." "Of course." The Duke paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "There will be considerable curiosity about your presence here. London society thrives on gossip, and your appointment will inevitably attract attention." Eleanor felt a flush of discomfort. "I shall endeavour to give no cause for gossip, Your Grace." Something like amusement flickered across his face. "Your mere presence is cause enough, Miss Reed. A young, unmarried woman of good breeding working in the household of a bachelor duke will set tongues wagging regardless of your conduct." "I see," Eleanor replied, though in truth, she did not entirely understand his concern. Governesses were employed in aristocratic households throughout England. "You may encounter hostility from certain quarters," he continued. "Lady Victoria's maternal aunt, the Marchioness of Rutland, believes she should have been appointed guardian. She will view you as my ally and treat you accordingly. I am accustomed to navigating difficult relationships, Your Grace." The Duke's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I don't doubt it, Miss Reed. Now, let us proceed to the drawing room. It's time you met your charge." Lady Victoria Jamesford proved to be a miniature whirlwind with her uncle's piercing blue eyes and a shock of auburn curls that refused to be tamed. She assessed Eleanor with unconcealed suspicion. "Another governess," she sighed dramatically. "Uncle Zack, you promised no more after Miss Pritchard fled in tears." "Miss Reed is nothing like your previous governesses," the Duke replied calmly. "I suggest you reserve judgment until you've become better acquainted." Victoria circled Eleanor slowly. "Can you speak Latin?" "Certainly," Eleanor replied in flawless Latin, quoting Cicero on the nature of friendship. Victoria's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing again. What about differential calculus? I would be happy to test your knowledge of basic principles before advancing to differentials, Eleanor replied, unfazed by the challenge. Can you fence? Came the next question. At this, the Duke intervened. Victoria, enough. Miss Reed is not here to perform like a circus animal. Eleanor surprised them both by answering, I cannot fence, Lady Victoria, but I'm willing to learn alongside you if your uncle approves. Physical exercise is important for a developing mind. A hint of approval crossed the Duke's features, while Victoria appeared momentarily disarmed. Very well, the girl said finally. You may stay until I find you boring. Victoria, the Duke admonished. It's quite all right, Your Grace, Eleanor said. Lady Victoria and I have reached our first understanding. I must endeavour not to be boring, and she must endeavour to recognize when she's being rude. Victoria's mouth opened in surprise, then closed again. For perhaps the first time in her young life, she seemed at a loss for words. Thus began Eleanor's new life at Jamesford House. The days fell into a pattern, mornings devoted to languages and literature, afternoons to mathematics and natural sciences, with music and art interspersed throughout the week. Victoria proved to be as brilliant as her uncle had claimed, absorbing knowledge with astonishing speed while constantly testing boundaries. The Duke, true to his word, required weekly reports. Every Friday afternoon, Eleanor would join him in his study to discuss Victoria's progress. These meetings, initially brief and formal, gradually lengthened as their conversations expanded beyond Victoria's education. You've accomplished in 3 weeks what 3 governesses failed to achieve in 6 months, the Duke remarked during one such meeting. Victoria actually completed her history essay without complaint. She's fascinated by powerful women, Eleanor explained. I've designed her history lessons around figures like Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great. The Duke's eyes held newfound respect. Clever, Miss Reed. Very clever indeed. Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to these weekly encounters, anticipating the moment when formality would give way to genuine conversation. The Duke, she discovered, possessed a formidable intellect and wide-ranging interests that matched her own. Have you read Darwin's O Voyage of the Beagle? He asked one rainy afternoon as their meeting extended well past its usual hour. Yes, though I found his observations on geology particularly compelling, Eleanor replied. The Duke's eyebrows rose. Most find his biological observations more accessible. Perhaps, but the concept of geological time, the slow, inexorable changes that shape our world over millennia, that perspective alters how one views human existence. A slow smile transformed his usually serious countenance. Miss Reed, you continue to surprise me. Such moments became precious to Eleanor, though she chided herself for treasuring them. The Duke's interest was purely intellectual, the novelty of finding a governess who could discuss scientific theories or debate political reform. Nothing more. Yet sometimes she caught him watching her when she bent over Victoria's lessons or played the pianoforte in the evening. His gaze would quickly shift when she noticed, but the intensity of those brief glances disturbed her peace of mind. As weeks passed, the household settled into comfortable familiarity. Victoria, while still strong-willed, had ceased her outright rebellion, instead channeling her energy into increasingly ambitious intellectual pursuits. The Duke divided his time between parliamentary duties and business affairs but never missed their Friday meetings. Then came the invitation that would shatter this hard-won equilibrium. The Duchess of Richmond's annual ball, Victoria announced, brandishing the gilt-edged card at breakfast. Uncle Zack, you promised to take me to a proper ball this season. The Duke frowned. You're too young for evening functions. I'm 12, practically grown. Besides, the invitation specifically includes me. Victoria thrust the card toward her uncle triumphantly. Indeed, the invitation requested the pleasure of the Duke of Jamesford's company and his ward, Lady Victoria Jamesford. And Miss Reed must come too, Victoria added. I require a chaperone, and you'll be busy with all those ladies hunting for husbands. Eleanor, who had been quietly sipping her tea, nearly choked. That would be most inappropriate, Lady Victoria. I am your governess, not a member of society. Nonsense, Victoria insisted. Uncle Zack, tell her she must come. The Duke studied Eleanor thoughtfully. Actually, Victoria raises a valid point. You would be attending in a professional capacity, as Victoria's chaperone. But Your Grace, I have nothing suitable to wear to such an event, Eleanor protested, her mind racing at the prospect of entering London's most exclusive social circle. That is easily remedied, he replied. I shall have my sister-in-law's modiste sent to measure you for an appropriate gown. And so it was decided, despite Eleanor's misgivings. 2 days later, Madame Beaumont, the most sought-after modiste in London, arrived with fabric samples and sketches. Under the Duke's explicit instructions, she created a gown of midnight blue silk that transformed Eleanor from invisible governess to a woman of undeniable elegance. The night of the ball arrived with alarming swiftness. Standing before her mirror, Eleanor barely recognized herself. The gown's simple lines emphasized her slender figure while the deep blue highlighted the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. For once, her chestnut hair was arranged in soft curls rather than her usual severe bun. A knock at her door revealed the Duke, resplendent in formal evening attire, his broad shoulders accentuated by impeccably tailored black wool. He stopped abruptly upon seeing her, an unreadable expression crossing his features. Miss Reed, he said finally, his voice unusually low, you look most presentable. Thank you, Your Grace, Eleanor replied, fighting an unexpected wave of disappointment at his restrained compliment. Victoria bounded into view, her white muslin gown and silver ribbons perfectly suited to her youth. Miss Reed, you look beautiful. Doesn't she, Uncle Zack? The Duke cleared his throat. Indeed. Shall we proceed? The carriage awaits. The Duchess of Richmond's ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, illuminating London's elite in all their bejeweled glory. Eleanor kept close to Victoria, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. The orchestra played a lively quadrille as couples took their places on the dance floor. Miss Reed, the Duke said, appearing suddenly at her side, would you honor me with this dance? Victoria will be safe with Lady Pembroke for a few minutes. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Your Grace, I'm here as a governess. It would be inappropriate, you're here as my guest, he interrupted gently. One dance, Miss Reed. Unable to refuse, Eleanor placed her gloved hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. The touch of his hand at her waist sent warmth cascading through her body despite the layers of fabric between them. You dance beautifully, he murmured as they moved through the figures of the quadrille. My father believed in a well-rounded education, she replied, struggling to maintain her composure under his intense gaze. He raised an exceptional daughter. The simple compliment, delivered in that deep voice, threatened to undo her completely. They separated for the dance figure, then came together again. People are staring, Your Grace, Eleanor whispered, noting the many eyes following their progress. Let them stare, he replied, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. I dance with whom I please. As the music ended, Eleanor curtsied deeply, aware that their brief interaction had just become the newest fodder for London gossip. The Duke escorted her back to Victoria's side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Miss Reed. A familiar voice cut through the crowd. The Countess of Rothwell approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and delight. How wonderful to see you again. And in such distinguished company. Lady Rothwell, Eleanor greeted her former employer with genuine warmth. Lady Sophia is well, I hope. Thriving, though she misses your instruction. The Countess turned to the Duke with a knowing smile. Your Grace, I see you've discovered Miss Reed's many talents. Indeed, he replied simply, his expression revealing nothing. As the evening progressed, Eleanor became increasingly aware of the attention they attracted. Ladies whispered behind fans, gentlemen cast speculative glances, and more than once she overheard fragments of conversation abruptly silenced as she passed. The Marchioness of Rutland, Victoria's maternal aunt, made her disapproval abundantly clear, approaching them with a frigid smile. Zachariah, how novel to bring your household staff to the season's premiere event. The Duke's expression hardened. Miss Reed is Lady Victoria's governess and my valued employee, Elizabeth. I would thank you to address her with respect. The Marchioness's gaze raked over Eleanor dismissively. A governess attending a ball. How times have changed. She lowered her voice to a venomous whisper. Though I suppose your reputation hardly has far to fall, does it, Zachariah? With that cryptic remark, she swept away, leaving Eleanor confused and the Duke visibly angry. Pay her no mind, he said tightly. Elizabeth has never forgiven me for being appointed Victoria's guardian over her. But the Marchioness's words had planted a seed of unease. What had she meant about the Duke's reputation? Eleanor realized how little she knew about her employer beyond his public persona. The ball concluded well after midnight. Victoria fell asleep in the carriage on the journey home, her head resting on Eleanor's shoulder. The Duke watched them, his expression softening in the dim light. Thank you for accompanying us tonight, he said quietly. Victoria behaved admirably under your guidance. She's a remarkable young lady, Eleanor replied. Though I fear my presence may have caused talk. The Duke's mouth curved slightly. London thrives on talk, Miss Reed. By next week, they'll have found a new subject for their gossip. But he was wrong. Far from fading, the whispers intensified in the days following the ball. Visitors to Jamesford House increased dramatically, ladies who had rarely shown interest in Victoria's welfare suddenly appearing for afternoon calls, their sharp eyes assessing Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. Invitations arrived daily, garden parties, musical evenings, even informal dinners, all including Victoria and, by extension, her governess. The Duke accepted some and declined others, seemingly oblivious to the stir their public appearances created. Eleanor might have remained equally oblivious had she not overheard two maids whispering in the corridor outside her rooms. They say he's completely besotted with her, one giggled. Mrs. Winters thinks there'll be an announcement before the season ends. A governess becoming a duchess? Never, the other replied. More likely she'll end up his mistress, poor thing. Eleanor froze, blood rushing to her face. Were they speaking of her? Impossible. The Duke had shown her nothing but professional courtesy, with perhaps the occasional hint of intellectual appreciation. There was nothing to suggest romantic interest. Yet she could not dismiss the conversation entirely. Something had changed in the household dynamic, a subtle shift in how the staff treated her, a mixture of deference and wary speculation that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The following Friday, their usual meeting was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was discussing Victoria's progress in Greek literature when Jameson, the butler, entered with uncharacteristic abruptness. Your Grace, Lady Pembroke has arrived and insists upon seeing you immediately. The Duke frowned. I left explicit instructions not to be disturbed during my meeting with Miss Reed. Yes, Your Grace. However, the lady was most insistent. She mentioned something about a matter in the morning paper that couldn't wait. A shadow crossed the Duke's face. Very well. Miss Reed, please excuse me. I shall return shortly. But he did not return, and after waiting half an hour, Eleanor returned to her rooms, puzzled by the interruption. The answer came the following morning in the form of a newspaper Victoria smuggled to the breakfast table despite strict household rules against such reading material. Uncle Zach, you're in the gossip pages again, Victoria announced, unfolding the Morning Post. Listen to this, London's most eligible Duke continues to surprise society with his unconventional choice of companion. The handsome Duke of J has been observed in the company of a certain governess at no less than 5 social functions this month, leading many to speculate about the nature of their relationship. Could the confirmed bachelor's heart have been captured by a woman of such modest station? Society matrons are beside themselves as the season's greatest prize appears increasingly beyond their daughter's reach. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The Duke, who had just entered the breakfast room, went completely still. Victoria, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, give me that newspaper immediately. But uncle, now, Victoria. The girl reluctantly handed over the offending publication. The Duke scanned the article, his expression darkening with each word. "You will return to your rooms and complete your Latin translation," he instructed Victoria. "Miss Reed and I must speak privately." Once Victoria had departed, Eleanor stood, hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. "Your Grace, I am mortified. I had no idea our professional association would be so grossly misinterpreted." The Duke placed the newspaper on the table, his movements deliberate. "You bear no responsibility for this, Miss Reed. Nevertheless, I think it best if I tender my resignation. Lady Victoria's education should not be overshadowed by such unseemly speculation." His head snapped up. "Resignation? Absolutely not. But Your Grace, my presence is clearly causing scandal." "I am no stranger to scandal, Miss Reed," he interrupted, his tone bitter. "Society has long delighted in dissecting my personal affairs. This is merely their latest amusement." Eleanor studied him, sensing depths of pain beneath his controlled exterior. "Perhaps if I refrain from accompanying you and Lady Victoria to social functions, and give credence to their gossip? Allow them to believe I've dismissed you because of their wagging tongues." He shook his head firmly. "I will not have it." "Then what do you propose, Your Grace?" The Duke was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "We continue as before. In time, they will tire of this particular story when no fuel is added to the fire." But Eleanor was not convinced. "And if the speculation continues? If Lady Victoria is affected by it? Then we shall address that circumstance when it arises," he replied with finality. "Now, I believe you have a Latin translation to supervise." The matter appeared settled, yet Eleanor felt increasingly uneasy. The servants' attitudes had subtly altered, some treating her with newfound deference, others with barely concealed resentment. Victoria, far from being disturbed by the gossip, seemed positively delighted, making pointed remarks about how well Eleanor and her uncle suited each other. The following week brought a fresh complication. The Duke announced at dinner that his annual house party at Jamesford Park, his country estate, would commence in a fortnight. "We shall have 20 guests staying for a week," he informed Eleanor. "Victoria will continue her studies in the mornings but may join the adults for suitable activities in the afternoons." "Of course, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, already dreading the prospect of facing society's scrutiny in the intimate setting of a country house. "Miss Reed will need several new gowns," Victoria declared. "Country attire, walking dresses, evening wear, Victoria," the Duke admonished gently. "Miss Reed is quite capable of determining her own requirements." But the girl persisted. "Uncle Zach, Miss Reed has only one evening gown. She cannot wear the same blue silk every night for a week. Even I know that's unacceptable." To Eleanor's surprise, the Duke conceded. "You make a valid point. Miss Reed, please consult with Madame Beaumont tomorrow regarding appropriate additions to your wardrobe. The expense will be covered as part of your professional requirements." "Your Grace, that's extraordinarily generous, but unnecessary." "It is necessary," he interrupted firmly. "You will be representing this household. I insist." And so, for the second time, Eleanor found herself measured and fitted by London's premier modiste, who created 3 evening gowns, 2 walking dresses, a riding habit, and various other garments deemed essential for country life among the aristocracy. The transformation was completed by the arrival of a small jewelry box the day before their departure for Jamesford Park. Inside, Eleanor found a simple strand of pearls with matching earrings and a note in the Duke's bold handwriting, "To complement your new wardrobe. ZJ." Eleanor stared at the pearls in dismay. This was beyond professional courtesy. This was the sort of gift a gentleman gave to what? A relation? A friend? A woman he was courting? The last possibility sent her heart racing despite her best efforts to dismiss it. She resolved to return the gift immediately, only to discover the Duke had already departed for his club, with instructions not to expect him until morning, when they would leave for the country. The journey to Jamesford Park took the better part of a day, with Eleanor, Victoria, and the Duke travelling in his private carriage while servants followed with the baggage. Victoria chatted excitedly about the planned entertainments, riding parties, archery contests, evening musicales, while Eleanor tried to calm her mounting anxiety. Jamesford Park proved to be everything a great English estate should be, 5,000 acres of rolling parkland surrounding a magnificent Palladian mansion that had been the Jamesford family seat for 12 generations. Eleanor felt increasingly out of place as footmen in livery carried her new trunks to a luxurious suite in the family wing. "Your rooms adjoin Lady Victoria's, as the Duke instructed," the housekeeper explained, eyeing Eleanor with barely concealed interest. "His Grace thought you would prefer to be near your charge." The guests began arriving that afternoon, earls and countesses, distinguished politicians, renowned artists, and, to Eleanor's dismay, the Marchioness of Rutland. Victoria was permitted to greet the guests in the Great Hall before being sent upstairs to rest before dinner. Eleanor intended to remain in her rooms for the evening, having prepared lesson materials for the following morning. This plan was thwarted by the arrival of a maid bearing a note from the Duke. "Your presence is requested at dinner. Victoria insists, and I find I cannot refuse her. ZJ." Eleanor touched the pearl necklace at her throat. She had decided to wear it, unable to find an opportunity to return it properly, and surveyed her reflection in the mirror. The emerald green silk gown was the finest she had ever worn, its modest neckline and long sleeves adhering to propriety while the rich color lent warmth to her complexion. Dinner was served in the grand dining room, where 40 guests sat at a table glittering with silver and crystal. Eleanor found herself seated between a jovial baronet and a famous poet, both of whom treated her with perfect courtesy while subtly probing for information about her relationship with their host. From her position, she could observe the Duke at the head of the table, the Marchioness of Rutland seated at his right as the highest-ranking lady present. Their conversation appeared strained, the Marchioness's expression growing increasingly sour as the meal progressed. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room while the gentlemen remained for port and cigars. Eleanor stationed herself near the pianoforte, hoping to avoid direct conversation. This strategy failed when the Marchioness approached, her silk skirts rustling ominously. "Miss Reed," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure nearby ladies could hear. "How clever of you to secure an invitation to dine with the family rather than taking your meals in the schoolroom, as is customary for governesses." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Lady Victoria requested my presence, your ladyship." The Duke was kind enough to grant her wish. "Indeed? How accommodating of him." The Marchioness's eyes dropped to the pearl necklace. "Those are lovely pearls, Miss Reed. A family heirloom, perhaps." "A recent gift," Eleanor replied, refusing to be intimidated despite the flush rising in her cheeks. "How interesting. The Duke has excellent taste in jewelry." The Marchioness leaned closer, lowering her voice. "A word of advice, my dear. Men like Zachariah Jamesford do not marry governesses, no matter how pretty or accomplished. If you harbor any illusions in that direction, abandon them now, before you find yourself with a ruined reputation and nowhere to go." Before Eleanor could respond, the drawing-room doors opened to admit the gentleman. The Duke's eyes immediately sought her out, his brow furrowing at the sight of her conversation with the Marchioness. "Miss Reed," he said, crossing the room with purposeful strides, "I believe you promised to play for us this evening." Grateful for the rescue, Eleanor moved to the pianoforte. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began a Beethoven sonata, but the familiar note soon steadied her nerves. She lost herself in the music, forgetting her audience until the final chords faded into appreciative applause. "Magnificent," the Duke said quietly as he turned the pages of her music. "I had no idea you played with such passion." "Music was my mother's gift to me," Eleanor replied, conscious of the many eyes watching their interaction. "She taught me before her death." The evening concluded with card games and conversation, during which Eleanor noticed the Duke deliberately circulating among his guests, careful not to pay her undue attention. She appreciated his discretion while simultaneously feeling a pang of disappointment. The house party settled into a pleasant rhythm over the next few days. Mornings were devoted to Victoria's lessons, afternoons to outdoor activities, and evenings to elaborate dinners followed by music or cards. Eleanor maintained a careful distance from the Duke in public while continuing to wear his pearls, a contradiction she could not fully explain even to herself. On the fourth day, disaster struck in the form of a sudden summer thunderstorm that drove the archery party indoors. Eleanor was returning to her rooms after Victoria's history lesson when she encountered the Duke emerging from the library, a book in hand. "Miss Reed," he said, his expression brightening, "I was hoping to speak with you privately." "Of course, Your Grace." He glanced around the empty corridor. "Not here. The conservatory should be deserted at this hour." The glass-domed conservatory was indeed empty, its lush tropical plants creating secluded alcoves among the gurgling fountains. Rain pattered against the glass roof as the Duke led Eleanor to a stone bench partially screened by palm fronds. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble. Eleanor's eyes widened. "I've been mindful of propriety, Your Grace, given the speculation we've already attracted." "Is that why you've been wearing my pearls while keeping your distance?" A rather mixed message, wouldn't you say? She touched the necklace self-consciously. "I meant to return them, but hadn't found the proper moment. They're far too valuable to be appropriate." "They suit you," he replied simply. "I knew they would." Eleanor gathered her courage. "Your Grace, may I speak frankly?" "I wish you would. I am deeply grateful for your generosity and the opportunities you've provided. But I fear your kindness has been misinterpreted, both by society and perhaps by your household staff." The Marchioness of Rutland suggested. She broke off, unable to repeat the woman's insinuations. "What did Elizabeth suggest?" he prompted, his voice hardening. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "That your interest in me might be other than professional, and that such interest would not lead to an honorable conclusion." The Duke's expression darkened. "She dared to imply she meant to protect me, in her way," Eleanor interrupted. "To warn me against developing expectations that could never be fulfilled." "And do you have such expectations, Miss Reed?" The directness of the question startled her. "Of course not, Your Grace. I know my place in the world." Something flashed in his eyes, anger? Disappointment, before his expression smoothed into polite neutrality. "Then we understand each other perfectly." Before Eleanor could respond, voices approached the conservatory. The Duke stood abruptly. "We should return to the others." They exited through different doors, Eleanor's mind in turmoil. What had just happened? Had she offended him? Or had he been testing her, ensuring she harbored no inappropriate ambitions regarding his position and fortune? That evening at dinner, the Duke was cordial but distant, directing most of his attention to a viscount's widow seated at his left. Eleanor told herself this was for the best, a clear signal to the assembled company that the gossip regarding their relationship was unfounded. Then why did it hurt so much to watch him smile at the attractive widow? The following morning, Eleanor received a cryptic note from the Countess of Rothwell, who had arrived the previous evening. "Meet me in the Rose Garden at 11. Matters of importance to discuss." Intrigued and slightly concerned, Eleanor made her excuses to Victoria and slipped out to the gardens once the morning lessons were complete. The Countess waited on a stone bench surrounded by blooming roses, her parasol providing shelter from the bright sun that had followed yesterday's rain. "My dear Miss Reed," she said warmly, patting the space beside her. "How lovely you look. Country air agrees with you." "Thank you for your kind note, Lady Rothwell. How may I assist you?" The Countess studied her thoughtfully. "It is I who wish to assist you, my dear. You've caused quite a sensation in London society, you know." Eleanor sighed. "Not by choice, I assure you." "No, indeed. But now you find yourself in a rather delicate position." The Countess leaned closer. "The Duke of Jamesford is notoriously private about his personal affairs, yet he has placed you in a most public position. Do you know why?" "I assume because he values my educational approach with Lady Victoria." A knowing smile played at the Countess's lips. "That may be part of it, but not the whole. What do you know of the Duke's past?" "Very little," Eleanor admitted. "He rarely speaks of personal matters. 10 years ago, Zachariah was engaged to Lady Caroline Talbot, daughter of the Earl of Shrewsbury. A week before the wedding, she eloped with his cousin, creating the scandal of the season. Since then, he has developed a reputation for keeping women at arm's length, never allowing any lady close enough to cause similar pain. Eleanor frowned. Why are you telling me this? Because, my dear, you have accomplished what a decade of London's most beautiful and accomplished young ladies could not. You've breached his defences. That's absurd, Eleanor protested. The Duke hired me to educate his niece, nothing more. Did he personally interview you at my home? Did he arrange for you to have rooms in the family wing rather than the servants' quarters? Has he provided you with an extensive wardrobe suitable for a lady of quality rather than a governess? Has he given you jewellery from his family collection? Eleanor's hand flew to her pearl necklace. These are family jewels. Those pearls belong to the Duchess of Jamesford, his mother. I recognized them immediately. The Countess's expression softened at Eleanor's shock. My dear girl, Zachariah is many things, brilliant, honourable, occasionally stubborn, but he is not a man who acts without purpose. What are you suggesting? That the Duke of Jamesford is in love with you, though he may not yet have admitted it to himself. Eleanor stood abruptly, overwhelmed. This is fantasy, Lady Rothwell. The Duke has shown me professional courtesy, nothing more. Is that why he watches you when he thinks no one notices? Why he ensured you would be seated near him at every dinner? Why he contradicted a lifetime habit of avoiding scandal by bringing you into society at his side? Even if what you suggest were true, which it cannot be, a duke does not marry a governess. The Countess smiled enigmatically. This duke might, if given sufficient encouragement. Before Eleanor could respond, they were interrupted by approaching footsteps. The Marchioness of Rutland appeared around a hedge, her expression souring at the sight of them. Lady Rothwell, she said coolly, and Miss Reed. How cosy. Elizabeth, the Countess replied with equal frost. Enjoying the gardens. Indeed. Though I find the company in certain sections less appealing than the flowers. Her gaze fixed on Eleanor. Miss Reed, I believe your pupil is looking for you. Something about a science experiment gone awry. Alarmed, Eleanor excused herself hastily, hurrying back toward the house. She found Victoria in the schoolroom, perfectly safe and engrossed in a book. Lady Rutland said you were looking for me, Eleanor said, slightly breathless from her rushed return. Victoria looked up in confusion. I haven't seen Aunt Elizabeth all morning. Eleanor realized she had been deliberately removed from her conversation with the Countess. But why? What had Lady Rothwell been about to say? The question haunted her throughout the day and into the evening's entertainment, a musical program featuring several accomplished guests. Eleanor was requested to perform, and she selected a poignant Chopin nocturne that reflected her turbulent emotions. As the final notes faded, she looked up to find the Duke watching her with such intensity that her breath caught. For a moment, everything Lady Rothwell had suggested seemed possible, that this powerful, complex man might actually harbour deeper feelings for her. Then Lady Rutland loudly requested the Viscount's widow to perform, and the moment shattered. The following day brought the house party's most anticipated event, an elaborate picnic by the lake, followed by boating and games on the sweeping lawns. Eleanor supervised Victoria closely, aware that excitement often led the girl into mischief. The Duke divided his attention among his guests, though Eleanor noticed he frequently glanced in their direction. After luncheon, Victoria begged to join a group of younger guests playing croquet. With the Duke's permission, Eleanor allowed it, taking the opportunity to stroll along the lake shore. She had walked perhaps a quarter-mile when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she was surprised to find the Duke approaching. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying slightly. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing at all. I simply wish to escape my duties as host for a few moments." He fell into step beside her. "Victoria seems to be enjoying herself." "She is. Thank you for including her in the adult activities. It means a great deal to her." They walked in companionable silence for several minutes before the Duke spoke again. "I owe you an apology, Miss Reed." Eleanor glanced at him in surprise. "Whatever for?" "For placing you in an untenable position." I did not fully consider how my actions would affect your reputation. My reputation is of little consequence compared to Lady Victoria's happiness. The Duke stopped, turning to face her directly. Your reputation is of great consequence to me. Eleanor's heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. Your Grace, Zachariah, he interrupted. When we are alone, I wish you would call me by my name. That would be most improper. A smile touched his lips. We passed the boundaries of propriety long ago, I think. Before Eleanor could respond, a shout from the direction of the lake shattered the moment. They turned to see a commotion on the water, a rowboat had overturned, and several figures were splashing in the lake. Victoria, the Duke exclaimed, already running toward the shore. Eleanor gathered her skirts and raced after him, heart pounding with fear. By the time they reached the lake, several men had dived in to assist the capsized boaters. To Eleanor's horror, one of the bedraggled figures being pulled from the water was indeed Victoria, coughing and sputtering. The Duke reached her first, gathering the soaking child in his arms. Victoria! Are you hurt? I'm fine, Uncle Zach, she stammered through chattering teeth. The B-boat tipped when Harry St. stood up. Eleanor quickly removed her shawl, wrapping it around the shivering girl. We must get her inside immediately. She needs dry clothes and warm drinks. The Duke carried Victoria swiftly toward the house, Eleanor following close behind. The other guests who had fallen into the lake were similarly attended to by concerned friends and servants. In Victoria's chambers, Eleanor efficiently directed maids to prepare a hot bath and warm bed. The Duke reluctantly withdrew to allow his niece privacy while she was changed and settled. An hour later, Victoria lay propped against pillows, sipping hot chocolate and looking remarkably cheerful for someone who had nearly drowned. It was rather exciting, she declared as the Duke and Eleanor stood by her bedside. Though I don't recommend falling into lakes while wearing full skirts. Most inconvenient for swimming. The Duke's expression remained grave. You might have drowned, Victoria. No more boating without my express permission. Yes, Uncle Zach. She yawned dramatically. I'm terribly tired now. Perhaps I should rest. An excellent idea, Eleanor agreed. I'll stay with you until you fall asleep. No need, Victoria said quickly. I'm perfectly fine. You and Uncle Zach should rejoin the guests. Isn't there dancing planned for this evening? The Duke's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Since when are you so concerned about our social obligations? Victoria attempted an innocent expression that fooled neither of them. I merely thought Miss Reed deserved some entertainment after caring for me so diligently. We shall both remain until you are asleep, the Duke declared firmly. Then we will discuss your sudden interest in our evening plans. Victoria pouted but soon drifted off, the excitement and trauma of the afternoon taking their toll. As they quietly left her chamber, the Duke placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, guiding her to a small sitting room adjacent to Victoria's suite. She did that deliberately, he said once the door closed behind them. The boating accident? Surely not. No, not the accident. But her insistence that we leave her and join the dancing. His mouth quirked. My niece has developed a romantic notion about us, I'm afraid. Eleanor flushed. Children often imagine such things. It means nothing. Doesn't it? The Duke studied her intently. What if she sees something we've been reluctant to acknowledge? Eleanor's pulse quickened. Your Grace, Zachariah, he corrected gently. Zachariah, she conceded, the name feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. We cannot, that is, I cannot allow myself to. He stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his clothing. Cannot allow yourself to what, Eleanor? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. To forget who I am. What I am. And what are you? Your employee. Lady Victoria's governess. His hand rose to touch her cheek, the gentlest of caresses. Is that all you are? Eleanor closed her eyes, struggling against the tide of emotion threatening to overwhelm her hard-won composure. It is all I can be." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Duke stepped back, his expression unreadable. "We should return to our guests." That evening, Eleanor pleaded a headache and remained with Victoria, unable to face the prospect of watching the Duke dance with other women after their charged encounter. Victoria, who had made a suspiciously swift recovery, peppered her with questions about the Duke's behavior. "Did Uncle Zack say anything about me while I was asleep? Did he hold your hand? Did he look at you the way Mr. Darcy looks at Elizabeth in her Pride and Prejudice?" "Lady Victoria," Eleanor said firmly, "your uncle and I discussed your health and nothing more. Now please focus on your reading." The girl sighed dramatically. "You're both so stubborn. Anyone can see you're perfect for each other." "That's quite enough," Eleanor replied, her tone brooking no argument. "Another word on the subject and I shall assign extra Latin translations tomorrow." The remainder of the house party passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor maintained a careful distance from the Duke, who seemed equally determined to avoid private encounters. They spoke only when necessary, always in the presence of others, their previous warmth replaced by formal courtesy. On the final evening, a grand ball was held for the neighboring gentry as well as house guests. Eleanor, claiming concern for Victoria's health following the boating incident, remained upstairs, though in truth she could not bear to watch the Duke fulfilling his social obligations with the eligible ladies present. Victoria, fully recovered and indignant at being denied the ball, eventually fell asleep after extracting a promise that Eleanor would describe every gown and dance in detail the following morning. Near midnight, a soft knock at the sitting-room door startled Eleanor from her book. She opened it to find the Duke standing in the corridor, still in his evening attire, white tie slightly askew as though he had been running his fingers through his hair. "Your Grace," she said, automatically stepping back to allow him entry. "Is something wrong?" He closed the door quietly behind him. "I needed to speak with you before we return to London tomorrow." "Of course. Victoria is asleep, but we can talk here." The Duke paced the small room, unusual nervous energy emanating from his normally composed figure. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." "About what you said?" Eleanor clasped her hands tightly. "I said many things. You said you cannot allow yourself to forget what you are." He stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. "But what if what you are is not what you were born to be?" "I don't understand." "Eleanor," he said, her name a caress on his lips, "when I first saw you teaching Sophia Rothwell, I was struck by your intelligence, your dignity, your quiet strength. I contrived to bring you into my household because I recognized something in you that matched something in me, a kindred spirit, perhaps." She stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this moment. "I told myself I merely wanted the best education for Victoria," he continued. "That was true, but incomplete. I wanted you near me. I wanted to know if what I sensed was real." "And was it?" Eleanor barely breathed the question. "More real than anything I've known." He stepped closer. "Eleanor Reed, you were born a gentleman's daughter, forced by circumstance into employment. But in your soul, you are my equal in every way that matters. Society would never accept, society," he interrupted, "will adapt, as it always does when confronted with a fait accompli. I am not proposing a scandal, Eleanor. I am proposing marriage." The word hung in the air between them. Eleanor's mind raced with objections, fears, impossibilities, and beneath them all, a wild, soaring hope. "You cannot mean it," she whispered. "I have never meant anything more." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Eleanor. I believe I began loving you the first time I heard you quote Euripides to a restless 12-year-old girl who would rather have been riding horses." A startled laugh escaped her. "You overheard that?" "I make it a habit to observe prospective employees without their knowledge." "You were magnificent, patient but firm, engaging her mind while acknowledging her frustrations." Eleanor shook her head in wonder. "I thought you barely noticed me until our Friday meetings began." "I noticed everything about you." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Your kindness to the servants. The way you hum Beethoven when you think no one is listening. How you always smell faintly of lavender and ink. Zachariah, she said, testing his name again, there will be talk. Scandal. Your position, my position is secure enough to withstand gossip. Victoria adores you. My closest friends respect you. As for the rest, he shrugged. Let them talk. I would rather face their whispers with you at my side than endure their approval in solitude. Eleanor looked up into those piercing blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity, tenderness, and love. Every objection melted away, leaving only the truth she had tried so hard to deny. I love you, she said simply. I have fought against it, told myself it was impossible, but I love you with all my heart. His smile transformed his face, erasing years of guarded solitude. He drew her into his arms, and when his lips met hers, Eleanor knew she had found her true place in the world. London, 1847. The whispers began in Lady Hamilton's drawing-room on a Tuesday afternoon, spreading through Mayfair like wildfire by Wednesday morning, and reaching fever pitch by Thursday's soirée at Almack's. By Friday, it was the only topic worthy of discussion in every fashionable salon from Grosvenor Square to Belgravia. Have you heard? The Duke of Jamesford is to marry his niece's governess. The plain little thing from Hampshire? Impossible. They say he's utterly besotted. Commissioned a tiara from Gerrard's that would make a princess envious. Well, I never thought I'd see the day. London's most eligible duke captured by a governess. Society is positively stunned. But Eleanor Reed, soon to be Eleanor Jamesford, Duchess of Jamesford, remained serenely indifferent to society's opinions. At that very moment, she sat in the library of Jamesford House, helping Victoria compose wedding invitations, her sapphire engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she guided the girl's penmanship. Careful with the flourishes, Victoria. Elegance lies in restraint. Yes, Aunt Eleanor, Victoria replied with a grin, the newly adopted title bringing pleasure to them both. In the doorway, unnoticed by either, the Duke watched them with undisguised adoration. Society might be stunned, but Zachariah Jamesford had never been more certain of anything in his life.